Dan and Amy, well, the Sunday Talkies provided a real introduction to the nation to Trump senior White House advisor Stephen Miller, who he's a young man, he's early 30s, right out of Duke University, where he actually made a bit of a name for himself by defending the Duke lacrosse players who were wrongly accused of rape.
Oh, really?
Yes. Then he went to work for the Hill, went on the Hill after college, worked for Michelle Bachmann, worked for John Shadegg, and then really made his bones working for Senator Jeff Sessions and being the spokesman for the Senate Judiciary Committee, helping Jeff Sessions to tube the Gang of Eight path to citizenship legislation that was advanced back during the Obama reign. And so Stephen Miller trotted out to talk about a range of issues, including this interesting exchange between he and Democrat operative Chuck Todd.
You mean the Chuckster?
On Meet the Press.
Yeah, about the future of Mike Flynn, the national security advisor.
The White House did not give you anything to say other than that.
They did not give me anything to say.
You cannot. So you cannot say whether or not
and answer, Chuck.
The president still has confidence in his national security advisor.
It's not for me to tell you what's in the president's mind. That's a question for the president. It's a question for our chief of staff. Asked and answered.
And Chuck Todd, boy, did the White House did not give you anything to say. Boy, if only some of those Sunday talk show luminaries had asked the same question of Susan Rice once upon a time. It's interesting, the whole Flynn flap. This is over his sort of changing answers on whether or not he had conversations about sanctions with a Russian diplomat prior to being elevated to national security advisor.
Yeah, he said that he didn't, and then he told Vice President Mike Pence that he didn't, and now there's alleged recordings proving that he did talk about Russian sanctions.
Well, his answer has changed a little bit from I didn't to I can't quite recall. So this is an issue, and it's one of these issues that Ross Douthat raises in his rather remarkable piece to me in the New York Times over the weekend, and I like Ross Douthat a lot. Can this presidency be saved? I'm talking about the possibility that the Trump presidency is already unrecoverable 3 weeks in. I think it's a little hysterical, but he writes, does Douthat, the presidency is in danger of his presidency, Trump's, is in danger of being swiftly Carterized, ending up so unpopular, ineffectual, and fractious that even with Congress controlled by his own party, it can't get anything of substance done. I don't know necessarily why that would be, but Douthat suggests that the kind of back and forth, war with judiciary, tax cuts, CNN or Nordstrom's perfidy, jobs, Bannon's theories about Islam and the crisis in the West, this kind of back and forth is complicating things and creating unnecessary division when he should be advancing the simple things that are popular, at least out of the gate. Big infrastructure bill, middle-class tax cut, corporate tax reform. That should be, for example, a simple linear message that is being advanced by Trump and his surrogates, and not this kind of full menu of appetizers as well as main courses that sort of confuse some of the issues. Though that raises, I think, some legitimate concerns. I'm not sure that we should be concerned that the presidency is already in jeopardy of falling apart. I think that's maybe a little dramatic. But for more on this topic, we'll get the opinion of Rich Lowry, who, of course, is the editor of National Review, Fox News contributor, and the author of the book Lincoln Unbound. Rich, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what about Douthat's concern that this thing is over before it's gotten too much of a start?
Well, I'm a huge fan, like you are, of Ross Douthat, who I think the most impressive thing about Ross is that he's the film critic of National Review.
Yes,
but,
there you go.
That was a brilliant column, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in it, but I would counsel Ross and pretty much everyone who's in the commentary business, we're 3 weeks in, take a deep breath. 4 years is a very long time. And, there have been some warning signs here, obviously. There are, concerns about Trump's temperament that have been there from the beginning. It's been at times chaotic, but it's just 3 weeks.
Well, what about the National Security Advisor, General Mike Flynn? I mean, do you think that he's on thin ice this morning?
I do. It's really quite bad. I don't think it's terrible to talk to the Russian ambassador if you're the incoming national security advisor. I don't understand why that is supposedly inappropriate or illegal, as some Democrats will argue. But be truthful about it. Be straightforward about it. And by all accounts, he wasn't with Mike Pence. And I'm sure Flynn knew that Pence would be asked about this and talk about it publicly. So indirectly, Flynn is misleading the public about the nature of his call with the Russian ambassador. So that's just, it was wrong when Susan Rice did it. It's wrong in this instance. And I think they'll have, very serious conversations about whether he can stay on or not.
There's also much talk about Sean Spicer, White House press secretary, being on thin ice. What about Steve Bannon in his column, Dothat? Is it? Wait, I always say Dothat. Is it? Say it for me. Douthat. Can he change his name to Dothat so that I don't have to change my pronunciation?
Just think of Douthat.
So he writes about Steve Bannon that he's trying to be both Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, and he's going to fail on both scores. Now the flip side is Steve Bannon gets a bit of a salutation from Fareed Zakaria saying that Bannon is not a racist; he's just an unusual conservative. Zakaria saying that, he's the Trump administration ideologist representing an older school of European conservative thought that's distrustful of free markets, determined to preserve traditional culture, religion, and unabashedly celebrates nationalism. But he's not a racist like Saturday Night Live and others would paint him to be. Where does Bannon figure in all of this and the sequencing of what has happened the first 3 weeks?
Well, I think the way to look at the power structure in the White House, there are three chiefs of staff. There's Reince Priebus, there's Steve Bannon, and there's Jared Kushner. And if any of them go, they will go in that order. I think Reince is the most vulnerable, then Bannon, and the one who will never go, because he's family, is Jared Kushner. Right. But I think that's how to think about the power. In terms of his ideology, he's not a racist. There's no evidence of that. He's a populist/nationalist who really kind of channels Donald Trump's political id and intellectualizes it. And I think he and Stephen Miller, who I have a lot of time for, I think is a really impressive guy, they have their fingerprints all over that executive order, which was just written in haste. And, every administration has this tendency. You're swept into power. You feeling you're invincible. You need to do everything really quickly. You need to deliver on your promises. And oftentimes it's just better to slow down a little bit. And they probably would have been better suited to do that on this executive order. And I think they're kind of in a legal box canyon now out in the Ninth Circuit. And it'd be best to just rewrite the thing. They still have the whip hand. They have the unilateral power to redo it, and they can write it in a way that still achieves the ultimate end, which is stricter, so-called extreme vetting. At the same time, they don't create the vulnerabilities. And my fear is going down this current path, you're going to create some really bad law. I mean, the Ninth Circuit basically suggested that if you're a foreign alien residing overseas, you might have U.S. due process rights, right, basically because you know someone in the United States. And that's crazy. That's what the left has wanted on immigration for a very long time. And you don't want that to be cemented by a 4-4 Supreme Court ruling.
Well, and on this score, it's interesting, maybe the execution lacked a little bit of foresight, but certainly, again, Trump directionally correct, and maybe there's no more evidence of that than what Merkel is doing in Germany, where they've set aside some $76 million in taxpayer money to create a fund to pay migrants to withdraw their asylum applications and leave Germany voluntarily. Don't want to be heavy-handed, but want them out. They can't handle. They overestimated their ability to assimilate on the other side of lacking foresight in Germany, and now they're trying to figure a way out of it.
Yeah, it was just a disastrous decision she made to basically welcome 1 million migrants in 1 year, no questions asked. And in these European countries, because of the European equivalent of the European Union's equivalent of the Supreme Court, it's just very hard to deport anyone. And we're basically having a smaller scale version of that debate here in the United States, because you're now going to see every deportation contested and potentially protested. And what the left wants to do is just break the Trump administration on immigration enforcement and demonstrate that it's basically impossible to have enforcement, which is what they want. And there are going to be many cases that are quite sympathetic. So you look at this thing over the last week or so, this deportation of this woman who was here for 20 years, and in a lot of ways, a very sympathetic case. Husband, children, they're all crying and distraught, understandably, that she's getting sent back to Mexico. On the other hand, she committed a crime on top of being here illegally, which was identity theft, and had a deportation order against her, which, as Stephen Miller pointed out yesterday on the shows, that doesn't happen by accident. That's extensively litigated within the immigration courts. So one side of this debate says, we got to deport people, especially when you have deportations orders against them. And you have another side of the debate saying, no, that's inhumane, and basically we need to defy all these laws.
And the ICE agents that are rounding up hundreds of these people, that was ordered before President Trump even took office, correct?
Yeah, it's not clear that the ICE is really doing anything differently yet. But this is, what you want is to send a message that actually things are going differently, and they are much tougher and stricter. And then you get the people who are most loosely connected to this country to leave voluntarily. This is what Mitt Romney maladroitly called self-deportation. But it's a good thing that you don't have to hunt people down and deport them. They'll just go, and then fewer people will come. And the Democrats always say, well, illegal immigration, the problem's been taken care of. There's net zero migration from Mexico, which is true. But it's not net zero from a lot of Central American countries. So you want the message to be sent across the board, don't come here illegally, because you're going to get caught and you're going to get deported. And it's just very bad news. No one really wants to be deported. It's a very traumatic process for everyone involved. So just the fear that ICE is cracking down more may have an effect that helps us get a grip on this problem.
So what about the criticism of Trump that this kind of short attention span theater that he runs is unhelpful to getting these big things done, whether it's an immigration or Obamacare repeal or tax reform? They're running on parallel tracks. They're running perhaps at a pace dependent on the confirmations of people like Tom Price when it comes to Obamacare repeal and replace. Do you agree that it would be more helpful if he was more focused on the big things and less focused on Nordstrom's spring lines?
Yeah, but I do see them running in parallel tracks. There's nothing about any of Trump's tweets that have made it harder to repeal and replace Obamacare. It's just a legislative process, and we've sort of forgotten this because we haven't done any legislation in 6 years. It's always messy. It's always complicated. It always takes longer than you think. And the repeal and replace is very politically sensitive. And I think Republicans would be really foolish to disregard these sort of demonstrations you're seeing at the town halls. This is genuine grassroots anger. And I think the best way to address it is not by backing off on repeal, which would be a rank betrayal of everything Republicans have said for the last 8 years, but to focus more on replace and do them simultaneously. Because then if you're a Republican congressman, you can show up at these town halls and someone says you're going to take away my health care, and you can say, no, we're not. This is the new system that is going to ensure just as many people, but in a more rational way. Instead, I fear a lot of Republicans are just saying, these are mobs and they're being paid for, which is exactly what Democrats said in August 2009, when they would have been much better to take account of what was real grassroots anger. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I don't like the Nordstrom tweets, I don't like the so-called judge tweets, but I don't think it's stopping other big things from happening. I think those things, the wheels are moving on that. It just takes longer. He is Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, nationalreview.com, Fox News contributor, author of the book Lincoln Unbound. Rich, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Hey, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.